Always hate having to pull that mic down. I'd like to start by thanking New Mexico Tech and actually Jim Maddox for inviting me and Xcel Energy to be a part of this. Thank you for the introduction too, Dr. Gill. I'm not at all surprised. I've been at Southwestern Public Service, one of the companies of Xcel Energy. I've been there for about 2.5 years, and it didn't take very long to come to understand what Hobbs America is all about, and the ambition and all the things that developed in the oil and gas industry in the past. And I see the potential for this to be a major part of the development of new renewable energy. So I think it's very appropriate that we're gathered here today. I see 3 legs on the stool of renewable energy and its future. One is public policy. Our federal and state government, the legislature, Congress, our regulators, the PRC here in New Mexico, all the policies that they put forward with regard to renewable standards, production tax credits, investment tax credits, carbon policy, cap and trade, all those things have a dramatic effect on not only solar but wind power and other renewable sources. The second leg on the stool is really the technology advancement. The companies doing the research, development, and demonstration. The third leg is the commercial aspect. And I put our company in that leg, along with the electric utilities of the industry, along with the entrepreneurs, the developers, the people that will eventually develop these projects and begin to form. Harry Tigg described, his days here beginning and creating a business. Same kind of thing will happen with solar energy here. Will happen with wind energy. So obviously, all 3 of these legs are interdependent. I just wanted to cover that because I'm going to focus not on the technology. I've got some photos and a little bit of information about different solar technologies. But mainly, I'm going to talk about the commercial aspects of solar, the cost curves, how it will fit into the utility system, and how it can be developed and where it will be developed. This map, probably no surprise, all the sun is in the southwest part of the country. That's good for us. So a lot like the wind resource being through the central part of the country, including eastern New Mexico, we've got this potential here. We're trying to develop solar power in all of our systems, and we also operate in the upper Midwest, in the Dakotas and Minnesota and Wisconsin. And it's a lot more difficult to make it work up there, but the cost of solar is starting to come in line. And the states that we're going to do solar in first and foremost will be Colorado and New Mexico. There's a lot of different solar technologies, but I kind of lump them into 3 categories: photovoltaic, concentrating photovoltaic, and concentrating solar thermal power. The kind of photovoltaic that's been most commonly used in the last 10 to 15 years is the crystalline silicone, but an emerging technology is thin film technology that's going to allow better architectural applications, and the cost of that's coming down. This is a technology that can actually be installed, a PV technology that can be installed actually to serve as the roof or the facade of a building. There's a lot of competition, and I'll show you a cost curve in just a minute. Concentrating PV, let me just actually get to the pictures. Here's a few photos of photovoltaic systems on homes. I think some of these are in our service area. These are some photos of utility scale PV, photovoltaic that's built at a large scale for electric utilities. And these are photos of concentrated PV. In this case, you basically design the solar cell to operate with a high level of insulation, a high level of solar input. You build some kind of mirror or reflective system to concentrate the solar power. When you do this, you obviously go with a 2-axis tracking system so that you directly track the sun, both north, south, and east, west through the day to get the absolute most. It's a higher capital cost, but you'll have a higher capacity factor or production of energy throughout the day. What's interesting about photovoltaic, be it concentrating solar, concentrating photovoltaic, or just thin film or flat plate PV. There's not a lot of economy of scale. We see some economy of scale. We see, like we have an 8 megawatt project in Alamosa in the San Luis Valley in Colorado. There's a little bit of economy of scale to that, but you could build a 2 megawatt or a 1 megawatt project for maybe somewhere around 110% of the cost per unit. So these kind of installations can be done very quickly. They can be done at small scale so that it's easy to connect them to the distribution grid instead of building a big expensive transmission interconnection. And there's not a lot of O&M. They operate relatively, you have to clean the facility and make sure that you operate the electric equipment and maintain it. The converters to convert the DC power into AC power. But it's primarily a big capital cost, can be done in modules of just about any size. Concentrating thermal projects, concentrating solar technology, there's a lot of different designs under development, and some of these are deployed throughout the country. I think this shows a photo of what I think is the most interesting looking is the power tower, which has a lot of fixed plate mirrors located around a field, and they basically reflect all of the solar insolation to the top of the tower. The photo at the bottom is a plant it's in Spain, and we've actually had a number of our people go over to visit this. We're not in the business of developing these kind of projects, but we want to understand it. What's most interesting about this project in Spain is the inclusion of storage. They use molten salt for storage, and I'll show you a graph in a minute that will help you understand why that's going to be an important part of these concentrating solar thermal projects. You've probably seen photos or been to some of the sites. The historic typical design is probably the parabolic trough collector is probably the lowest cost. These kind of projects will be built in 50 or 100 megawatt projects or bigger. At this point in time, it probably requires like a group of utilities to go together and make a project like this happen. Divide up the power purchase so that we share in the output of these large projects. These projects will result in more construction. They're built over a longer lead time. One thing that we're starting to look at is the possibility of using solar trough or some of the other concentrating thermal technologies and maybe augmenting the thermal input into some of our existing power plants so that we would, in essence, co-fire something like a Cunningham or a Maddox station steam plant with some solar energy, but still be able to back it up and fire it with gas the rest of the time. So that's a technology that probably has a lot of potential value. Talk a little bit about power plants. One thing I would like to emphasize is that there is no one answer. The answer is not wind. The answer is not solar. It's not all nuclear. It's not all clean coal. It's not all nat gas. We've come to understand at Xcel as we've integrated, I think we have about 2,700 megawatts of wind power on our system now, and we're really just starting to move into the solar additions pretty aggressively. But one thing we know is that it's probably a mixture of all these things. Finding the right mix of baseload coal, new clean coal, nuclear, natural gas, especially combined cycle, and aeroderivative, highly flexible plants that can follow the intermittent renewable resources, along with conservation, load management, and the other emerging renewable technologies. It's really making a mixture of those work for any one power system. That's very important, and it's something that we're trying to concentrate on. I think the thing that our company is focused on bringing to the table isn't let's advance the technology so much as what we need to do is find a way to most economically get more wind power, start to bring solar power into our portfolios, along with making that work means planning the rest of our resources to fit with those. If we know that we're going to have a lot of wind power and solar, Part of the equation to get there is planning the right gas-fired facilities that will back it up, operate really efficiently when they're unloaded, flexibility in terms of start, stop, ramp rates, those kind of things. So planning this overall system, looking commercially at what can result in a low-cost power supply portfolio for our customers makes a huge difference in terms of introducing these technologies. You know, in the past 10 years, solar has made the most sense off-grid. Customers, you know, you see highway signs that, you know, it costs a lot of money to run distribution to them. So you see it all over the place where there's solar cells that are powering lights and on highway signage. We also have customers geographically located, so a distribution line extension would be really expensive. It's made sense to install solar there. What's starting to make sense, though, is to install solar in areas where we have renewable portfolio standards. I think the big driver for new solar, like here in New Mexico and Colorado, those are our two states that have renewable standards that require that a certain % of our energy by various time periods come from solar as well as wind and other renewables. That's driving the commercial adaptation and the inclusion of solar power into the supply mix. I talked about the importance of storage, especially with the large concentrating solar projects. This graph, for those of you that, if you can see this, it basically shows each curve is 1 month. And it's for this region of the country. It's for New Mexico and Colorado. It basically shows what the expected solar output from this is not a fixed plate. It's basically a 2-axis solar generator. But it basically shows, you can see the difference between the winter months at the bottom and the peak months of solar production are in June, May, July, and August. Now, a very good thing about solar compared to wind is that correlates much more closely with electric demand on the system, not just here for SPS, but for most parts of the country. We peak in the summer, and we peak when loads are high, driven by hot temperatures, mainly air conditioning driven. So that's very good. The problem is it's not quite a match. And if you look at this, solar peaks around probably 11 o'clock to 12 to 1 o'clock, right through the middle of the day when the sun's highest, okay? Our electric peak in the summer peaks from somewhere between 4:30 and 7 o'clock, okay? So we still have only about, in the summer months, we only have about somewhere between 50 and 70% of the production from a solar plant online at the time that we need it the most. In the winter, our peaks are actually kind of double peak. We peak early in the morning, and then we peak in the evening. So solar starts to look like it's inversely related to the electric demand on the system. That's what's going to make the big concentrating solar thermal projects and the inclusion of some kind of storage very important. But remember, like I said earlier, as long as the utility is behind the scenes planning other generation that can back up the renewable energy when the sun's not shining or the wind's not blowing, we'll be okay. It's just that it'll be more cost effective and help avoid the installation of more generating capacity of traditional natures if we have storage built in with it. These graphs show some cost curves, and this comes from the Department of Energy. Currently, the cost of photovoltaics is in the range of probably 13 to 20, maybe 22 cents a kilowatt hour, okay? Just to compare that, our system cost for just the power supply, not counting the cost of the transmission and distribution, just power supply cost on our system is in the, depending upon natural gas prices and some fluctuation in coal, we're probably in the 4 to 5.5, 6 cent range, okay? So anyway, currently photovoltaics cost about 13 to 22 cents, but most projections are for those costs to drop over the next 10 years, somewhere into the 9 to 18 cents. Concentrating solar power, on the other hand, currently costs 9 to 12 cents, and they'll drop into the 6, 7, 8 cent range, according to projections. So you can see it becoming economic. Now, I'll let you in on something. One of the things that we actually, when we do long-term planning for our company, one of the things that we're actually starting to think a lot about is, because we're in a real long-term business. You know, most of the things we build, distribution facilities, transmission, power plants, you know, they last for 40, 50, 60, maybe 80 years. We run them a long time. We see a point out in time. I don't know if it's 12 years or 15 or 18 or 20, but we definitely see things, a point where distributed generation is going to be more economic than central station power. And it's going to have a big effect on the way utilities plan our system. Actually, it can be a big threat if you don't develop a business model to start to incorporate that, encourage it, and move your business plan to consider that. Okay, just a little bit about solar and XL. We really started in solar a few years ago when the voters in Colorado passed an amendment to require a certain amount of renewable energy in the state. And they said of the 4% of our energy that needed to come from renewables, 4% of that had to be solar, and half of that 4% needed to be customer-sited, on customer homes, at customer businesses. Since then, the legislature doubled those goals, basically. We have a 2% cost cap on overall rates in Colorado, okay? So we haven't hit that yet. And one of the reasons that we haven't is that the wind power has come in at a low enough cost that it's more than offset the cost increases from the solar. Okay, so it's working out really well. In New Mexico, we now have a renewable portfolio standard that's similar. Actually, it's more aggressive. And it will require 100 megawatts of solar by 2020. And I think 45 megawatts for SPS in New Mexico by 2011. Now, I just want to put that in perspective. The goal in Colorado, the 100 megawatts by 2020, is the same as the 100 megawatt goal here in New Mexico. But our system in Colorado and the amount of load that we serve is it's about 5.5, 6 times as much. So this is actually a very, very aggressive goal in terms of incorporating solar power into the power supply mix here. Not that we're complaining. We're going to find a way to make this work. This is a photo of the 8-megawatt solar project in near Alamosa in the San Luis Valley. It was built a year ago for us, and we have a 20-year power supply agreement. You know, at this point in time, XL doesn't plan to invest in these projects. We may, and we'd like to keep that option open. But at this point, we're relying on developers, entrepreneurs, get venture capital, get debt financing, put the projects together, and enter into long-term power sale agreements with us. Let me talk a little bit about New Mexico, and we're really taking off here. We just launched last month the Solar Rewards Program, which is a lot like what we've been doing in Colorado for the last year and a half. And basically what we'll do is we'll buy the solar renewable energy credits back from customers. We'll enter into 10 to 14-year contracts, 10-year business, 14-year residential, and we'll pay 20 cents a kilowatt hour for the renewable credit, the solar renewable credit associated with the solar production. The other thing that's really important in New Mexico is that we have net metering. So if a customer's solar facility on their rooftop is generating more power than they're using, they sell it back to us at the same price they buy power from us for. Now, it's a good thing to do at the beginning. As we get more and more customers generating their own solar power, there's a trapped cost there that we need to recognize, and that is a big part of the cost that customers pay is the fixed cost of the wires, the transmission, the distribution. So at this point, we're paying back for that, and that customer really, that generates solar power, isn't really paying their share of the cost of the delivery infrastructure. But it makes sense to economically to get this going. As we get further and further down the road, that would result in shifting cost to other customers, and it's a policy issue that we'll have to work through as the penetration and the saturation of distributed generation increases over time. A couple of other plans that we have in New Mexico. We've committed, as part of a settlement in another case, to invest $1 million in a solar project. Now, this might end up creating a couple hundred kW of solar. What we'd really like to do is do this in some of the communities that we serve, like Hobbs or Roswell, maybe Carlsbad, Clovis, Portales, and do it in a way that we can do this in a public place, on a public building, try to link education into it, monitor the facility, try to use it for training and education, maybe with the school systems. We're also working on an RFP stands for Request for Proposals. We're going to buy 45 megawatts of solar power to satisfy the 2011 Renewable Energy Standard. We worked for about probably 9 months with the other utilities in the region, with Tri-State Public Service Company in New Mexico and El Paso Electric, on a joint RFP to try to develop like a 150, 200 megawatt concentrating thermal solar project. It didn't come in cost effective compared to the PV projects and the concentrating PV projects that we have available. That economy of scale of building the 150, 200 megawatt plant didn't really pay off. So the utilities have basically parted ways, and we're each doing our own thing. So we'll be acquiring and entering into contracts, I think, in the very near future. As a matter of fact, I'm kind of frustrated with our resource planning people. I was hoping that we'd have this done and I could come here and talk about it. But it will be in, if we did the concentrating thermal solar, it was going to be in the southwest part of the state, where the project would have the best economics. And P&M obviously was interested in having it over there. As it looks, we will put it in our service territory. So we'll be entering into contracts. And like I said earlier, there's not a lot of economy of scale associated with photovoltaic. So it's probably, instead of 45 megawatt one facility, it's probably going to be 5 9 megawatt facilities or 8 6 megawatt facilities. It'll be spread around. And we will locate it in our service territory. Another thing that does for us is it's a lot easier to connect it to the grid. We have some big customers down here, oil and gas customers. They call us up. We got about a year's notice, and they need to hook up a 10 megawatt load. It's no harder to hook up a 9 megawatt solar facility and put it into the system than it is to do that. So that's probably what will be coming, and I hope we'll have news about that in the really near future. I want to thank you for the interest. It's really great to come to oil and gas country and have this kind of interest in renewable energy. But it reflects on how forward-thinking you are. And I know our company believes, we think carbon cap and trade's coming. We're trying to prepare for it. We are voluntarily reducing our CO2 emissions. We got a plan to reduce our emissions by 10 to 20% compared to 05 levels. SPS is well on its way to doing that. And I think it only makes sense to embrace these technologies, start to incorporate them. You grow slowly at the beginning, but it was about 9 years ago. I was in charge of resource planning, and I remember struggling with the first 80 megawatt wind farm on the SPS system, that first 80, now 160 megawatt wind farm at Lamar on the Piesco system, and the first 100 megawatts on the Buffalo Ridge in Minnesota. We struggled with, are we going to be able to incorporate this? Well, how's it going to affect our system? That was 300 megawatts 9 years ago, and today we got 2,800, #1 company in wind by a factor of 2. And I think if we embrace solar and grow fast, early, work our way into it, same thing will happen. So anyway, thank you, Hobbs America, New Mexico, and this is